Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight it's a good day in America, maybe a rare good day, but we're going to celebrate no matter what. Here's the context for why it's good: censorship. Censorship is essentially the hallmark of neoliberalism. Have you noticed that? Our leaders seem to spend a lot more time trying to control what we say and think than trying to improve our country. And that means that anyone who utters the wrong words, even accidentally, gets fired or banned or ostracized or even charged with a crime. We've seen that too. We don't need to give you more examples of it. They are literally everywhere. If you live here, you're deeply familiar with it. But censorship now defines America's public conversation. We spend an awful lot of time complaining about that on this show. We probably don't spend enough time asking, what is this all about? Why are the authorities suddenly so intent on controlling our words? Why are they so afraid of free speech? This is a new thing, and the answer is pretty simple. It's an act of self-preservation. If voters were allowed to think for themselves, the entire system would teeter and possibly collapse. Sound like an overstatement? Okay. Consider the ideas that the people in power use to justify their power and their rule over you. Here's some of their slogans, not one of which you're allowed to disagree with. Here they go. America is a racist country. White supremacy is our biggest threat. January 6th was a coup. Ukraine is a vitally important ally. Gender is a social construct. Climate change is an existential crisis. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. And so on. These phrases are so common now that you might not even think about them anymore. You hear Biden or Pelosi repeat them for the 5th time in a single day and you just start to go numb. But take a break from the numbness, pause, and think about it. Consider each of these slogans on its merit. Are the words actually true? Do they correspond to reality, observed reality? No, they don't. None of them do. In fact, they're ridiculous. They're laughable. And that would be very obvious to all of us if we were allowed to think about it. But we're not allowed to think about it. Effectively, all rational scrutiny of the regime's claims have been banned with the help of so-called news organizations. Our social media platforms, which once promised to give every American a voice, now function like the North Korean state news agency. They're organs of propaganda. This crept up on us, and it caught a lot of people by surprise, particularly conservatives. Conservatives were taught from a very young age to support big business because big business was a bulwark against government overreach. And that made sense, and it was true for quite a while. But very few imagined what it would look like if big business harnessed monopoly power and then joined that power with government power to strip us of our constitutional rights. Again, this happened incrementally, but now it's here. So these aren't really free market companies. They resemble repressive governments. They're too big. They're too powerful for you to do anything about. You can't resist. So if you want to talk in public in 2022, you have to submit to their censorship. It's depressing. It doesn't seem like there's a solution. That's what America looked like when we woke up this morning. But thankfully, and it's very nice to be able to say this on a Monday, things are changing, and they appear to be changing fast. Elon Musk, who's the head of Tesla and SpaceX, famously a billionaire, just announced he has bought an almost 10% stake in Twitter. That makes him the largest shareholder in Twitter. So why does this matter? Well, because Twitter matters, whether you want it to or not. Twitter is hardly the largest social media platform, but Twitter sets the tone for all news coverage, for all information. Twitter is where our professional class goes to learn which opinions are acceptable and which are forbidden. And the effect is obvious to everybody. If our public conversation suddenly seems stilted and one-sided, it is because, in part, Twitter itself is so stilted and so one-sided. Anyone who dares express a heterodox opinion, even if it's true, gets banned. We found that out last week the hard way. So whatever you think or think you think of Elon Musk, he certainly understands that. Quote, "Given that Twitter serves as the de facto public town square," he wrote recently, "failing to adhere to free speech principles fundamentally undermines democracy." End quote. That is true. Twitter's shares surged nearly 30% on the news of Elon Musk's purchase, so for him it turned out to be a pretty good buy. But it's hard to imagine that Musk bought Twitter shares for the investment. He's already the world's richest man. He does not need the money. Could this be the first move in a hostile takeover of Twitter that transforms Twitter into a platform for free speech? Seems that way. Elon Musk is not an orthodox conservative, but he sees the people in power with devastating clarity. A few months ago, he described wokeness, that is to say the ideology at the heart of Twitter's business operations, as, quote, one of the greatest threats to modern civilization. Watch.
It is a prevalent mind virus and arguably one of the biggest threats to modern civilization. So do we want a humorless society that is simply rife with condemnation and hate, basically? At its heart, wokeness is divisive, exclusionary, and hateful. It basically gives mean people a reason, it gives them a shield to be mean and cruel, armored in false virtue.
When was the last time you heard a crisper and more precise definition than that? Wokeness gives mean people a shield to be mean and cruel, armored in false virtue, end quote. Not a lot of CEOs talk this way. In fact, none. They're not allowed. The fact that a CEO who does talk this way may take over one of the most important communications platforms in the United States is cause for celebration, real celebration. The censors are powerful, but it turns out they may not be all powerful. So what happens next? Let's be very clear. This is not a business transaction. It's much bigger than that. Elon Musk is a massive threat to the way things are. So, by definition, it will not be long before they are calling him a racist. You can mark your calendar. Tonight, there are Democratic operatives studying everything Elon Musk has ever said in public. They're preparing one of the nastiest campaigns of character assassination in memory. They have no choice but to do this. Restoring free speech to Twitter is the greatest possible threat to the people in charge. They have to control the information. If they don't, they fall. So you're going to be hearing a lot about Elon Musk in coming days, and all of it will be negative. At some point, they're going to unearth this clip from the Babylon Bees podcast back in December. They'll tell you this is some kind of fascist talk or dangerous ethno-nationalism. We'll let you judge for yourself.
There are not enough people. I can't emphasize this enough. There are not enough people. And I think one of the biggest risks to civilization is the low birth rate and the rapidly declining birth rate. It is, and yet so many people, including smart people, think that there are too many people in the world and think that the population is growing out of control. It's completely the opposite. Please look at the numbers. If people don't have more children, civilization is going to crumble. Mark my words.
Okay, so the first tip that what you just heard is forbidden is that it's real. He's not talking about something ephemeral. He's not talking about the Academy Awards. He's talking about perpetuating the species, something that has inherent meaning that we ought to be thinking about, but that by design we're not. Have more children, he said. That's one of the things you're no longer allowed to say in public. Now, Musk himself has already ignored that order. He's got 8 kids. The problem with people with 8 kids is they're hard to control. Why? Because they're apt to love their own kids more than the corporation they work for, or more than the government they live under. So neoliberal leaders hate the idea of big families in the same way they hate the idea of religious faith, because both are a challenge to their power.